What's going on, guys? This is Bradley alongside Zach and Dawson. And today we are going to be continuing our off-season position series. And we're going to be talking about the O-line today, probably the position that we all feel most strongly about that would be considered a need this off-season. We have Zach back today, so that's nice. And yeah, how are you guys doing? We've done a few episodes since the season ended now, sort of getting into the combine this upcoming weekend. And free agency will be here in a few weeks.
It's exciting because we're literally in combine week. It's all happening really fast. And to me, it feels like football season ended months ago, but it was literally just a couple weeks ago. And we're getting into the best part of the offseason, man. Free agency, trades, drafts coming up. Like it's going to be exciting. And there's a lot of different options for the Ravens out there. And we just got to hope to capitalize on them and go out and get it done.
Yeah, I think the only reason why we're so intrigued by this position is because there's such a low ending to this, and there's also such a high. There's so many good free agents that the Ravens could somehow figure out, and maybe you bring back someone like Ronnie and still get a big ticket guy, or you walk away with none of them, and maybe you're really trying it in the draft. I'm excited to break this down, but it's also extremely scary, I assume, for the front office too.
Yeah, I feel like all three of us kind of agree that the Ravens didn't do enough last offseason in terms of O-line. I was looking back at a few of our videos in July and August, and we were talking about how, oh, yeah, they're definitely going to sign a few veterans here in training camp, whatever. Yeah, they didn't sign anyone, and they just went into the season with what they had. And, it was fine, but you would like more. You'd like to have an elite offensive line. So to start off, we'll talk about the players who are under contract for next season. You got Rosengarten, Voorhees, Linderbaum, Falele, Nick Samak. Is that all? I believe that's everyone. So going into next season, you look at an offensive line of Rosengarten at left tackle, probably Voorhees at left guard, Linderbaum at center, Falele at right guard, and they don't even have a second tackle on the roster right now. So it's not looking good. They definitely need to make a lot of moves. How do you guys feel about the players? We'll start with Zach, currently on the roster.
So obviously I feel great about Linder and Mr. Rosengarten, but I feel that people like Voorhees is technically unproven. People like Falele are technically unproven. I know he was a Pro Bowl alternate, but we would say that even another year's worth of being in the starting lineup would help, would be growth in a different way. So they had a lot of experience and eventually got going, especially this is talking about Falele, but I'm cautiously optimistic about it because I feel like if we don't really find a guard for the right price, I'm okay with him starting another year with the same kind of group, and hopefully they stay healthy. We're probably not going to mention Linderbaum much today just because, as solid as it gets, but just want to give him his credit just because how perfect of a rock can you have right now? Is it this offseason where he's technically extension ready?
I think so, because it's 2 more seasons, yeah.
So maybe some news like that happens. I don't know if that would help Cap at all, but even then, I'd like to see just really some trenches moves in general. And I'm not totally against the group we have now. Obviously, we know that some people are going to be brought in. It's just the group we have now. It's a good start. That's what you want.
Yeah. Right. I think cautiously optimistic is the good terminology to use there, Zach, because of course we have confidence in our guys, but going off that offensive line that currently is under contract, that is absolutely not what I want to see going into next season. I do not want a rookie right tackle out there. I do not want those guards that we have currently. It's a position that the Ravens need to go out this offseason and 100% put their focus on, and they can't afford to miss. This cannot be a situation where, you went all in on Stanley, you missed out on him, and now you're screwed trying to scrape up, a tackle through the draft or free agency. This is a position where they need to go out and know for sure that they're going to solidify. Like I said, cannot afford to miss. So my opinion is you need to throw everything at Ronnie Stanley. You need to make sure this guy returns to Baltimore. I really don't see any reason why he shouldn't come back. I can't justify Ronnie Stanley leaving. The only way I can see that happening is if somebody offers $25 million to him a season. a bad team. But of course, you have, Tyler Linderbaum, who's a franchise center, and like Zach mentioned, him and Caham are both available for extensions this offseason. So potentially you could see some two big deals there come together, because those are obviously two guys that the Ravens, want long term. Those are both franchise cornerstones. The guard play, man, it's what concerns me. I do not want Daniel Falele out there. I honestly think Patrick McCary will leave in free agency, and those two spots need to be shored up. And I mean, if you're going to ask me right now, we're going to get into all this, of course, but the ideal situation would be bring Stanley back, go out and get yourself a guard, and basically run it back with Linderbaum and
Rosengarten.
I almost said the complete opposite name. Roger Rosengarten at right tackle. That would be the most ideal situation for Baltimore, and I would feel very confident going into the next season with that.
Yeah. I think back to the 2019 season, and I think we've talked about this together, guys, off air. You have, and it's hard to replicate this, but you have Ronnie Stanley left tackle and Orlando Brown as the bookends. You probably had 2 top 5 tackles that season. You had Marshall Yanda, probably the best guard in the league at the point. And then you had Bozeman, and I don't know if it was McCary or Skura, but the Ravens didn't have good weapons that year. They had kind of an aging Mark Ingram, and their offense was unstoppable because they had an elite, probably best in the NFL offensive line. And that's just what I'm trying to say. It matters. I don't care what anyone says. It's the second most important spot on a team besides quarterback. So you got to go get your guys. And I agree with Dawson. We heard Eric DeCosta at the Combine, I think just yesterday, talk about they're pretty optimistic that they're going to re-sign Ronnie Stanley. Like you said, Jags give him $25 million. Probably not going to happen for the Ravens there, but I think they can bring him back. And then we'll see about guard, right? So yeah, to get into the free agents, there's a lot of guys. In terms of guard, you got Trey Smith on the Chiefs, who's going to get a massive contract. Mekhi Becton played well for the Eagles. Will French fries, as we like to say. Kevin Zeitler, former Raven. Tevin Jenkins. In terms of tackle, you got Ronnie Stanley, of course. Alaric Jackson is an intriguing guy on the Chargers, I believe. Would be a little cheaper than Stanley. Dan Moore, Cam Robinson. Zach, how do you feel about the free agents, maybe obviously besides Ronnie Stanley this offseason?
Well, it's kind of scary to think about these guys. This in my head is whenever we dip in if we lose someone like Ronnie. So if we're looking at a great cheap option, I think Zeitler is there for around a market of $9 million, I think is what our research has. So I'd love to see some reunion there. Also, Mekhi Becton had an amazing kind of bounce back year with the Eagles. He's kind of not necessarily a swing guy. He doesn't play every single one well, but he excelled eventually at the guard and played tackle before. I think he was drafted as a tackle. So Becton is plenty talented, especially at 25 years old. If you get him on some kind of long-term deal, maybe that's a nice little splash. But overall, I see this kind of I think we'll talk about it with just the draft prospects, but I like seeing those names a little more than the current market because it's an expensive market. It feels expensive, just kind of giving it to one guy this much. Even though I would be on the team that says to pay Ronnie basically whatever he asks for. Even if there were a Jags to come in and be like, here's a blank check, I would say, hey, Eric, let's batch it. This guy kind of took that pay cut really to keep a talented group and create more of a talented group together. And he's exactly what the team, embodies as a long staple player for the Ravens and especially the offensive line. So when we mentioned, all those guys that we have on the roster, it's hard to imagine the roster right now without Ronnie. I think you get his deal done no matter what. And hearing, DeCosta and Harbaugh talk pretty confidently about meeting up with the agent in Indy, I think this week or next week or whenever that whole combine stuff is, I feel confident that deal's going to be done. But then the next would be a splash. I think there's plenty of guys out there. I'm just kind of – I see our front office as a group that waits a little bit. They did it with Derrick Henry. this is just kind of an example, but you have an incredible market for running back last year, and it goes and goes, and then kind of stalls out once everyone's kind of signed the big ticket deals. Maybe that happens again with this. Maybe the Trey Smiths are gone. Maybe Mekhi Becton gets swept up, and there's a guy like Tevin Jenkins, Will Fries that is gonna accept a lower end offer, and the Ravens hop on that. I feel like that would be the ideal situation, but I'm just totally interested, really, even what you guys think of a perfect candidate to go along with, hopefully Ronnie, and maybe the hopefully not backup option to Ronnie.
Yeah, I'm all for going out and punching this offseason demon, if you want to say, of rebuilding the offensive line right in the face. I want to go out and solidify this unit, much like the 2019 unit, and I want to build a wall in front of this already stellar offense that just basically makes it unstoppable. And seriously, I mean, there's chances and there's a lot of opportunities for them to go here. I truly do believe Ronnie Stanley returns. I am having a hard time seeing a world where the Ravens don't bring him back. I truly do think it will happen soon as well. I think that, kind of like Zach said, with the whole thing of, John Harbaugh and Eric DeCosta both at the combine yesterday, in very similar fashion, stating that they're very hopeful and optimistic that a deal will be reached and soon. I don't think he'll hit the open market, and I really hope he doesn't, because like we already said, if he does, it could get a lot more tricky than if you were to lock him up before that. I think Ronnie Stanley is going to be our left tackle next season, and moving forward, I think the Ravens will give him what he wants. And I think then at that point, you have the two tackles, of course, solidified. And now you really just got to go out and get yourself one. I mean, at best two, of course, but I would say one capable guard. And your offensive line is a lot better than it was last year, because we all know the guard play last year was very lackluster. Even if Daniel Falele was a Pro Bowl alternate, it wasn't good. And I'm all for bringing the old guy and Kevin Zeitler back. I mean, his market value is less than 10 million. It looks like, I would say around 10 million. And I think he still wants to play. And he had a fantastic season last year in Detroit. I don't know why the Ravens let him go, but he left, came to the Lions, and had a great year once again. So I'm all for bringing him back if he wants to ride out, last 2 years of his career if he wants. I don't know if he wants to play one or two, but I'd be all for bringing him back. And you basically plug him in at right guard. And if you want to throw in Voorhees at left guard to kind of smash him in between two very, very good offensive linemen in Stanley and Linderbaum, I mean, that's probably a perfect opportunity for him. You're kind of allowing him to fail and struggle, if you would, because the offensive line other than him would be so good and so surefire that you could mask weaknesses by him if he were to jump in and, struggle out the gate. And I would be all for that. I would absolutely love an offensive line of Stanley, Voorhees, Linderbaum, Zeitler, and Rosengarten. I think that would be incredible.
Insane.
I would be all for it. Think about that. Seriously. You could go out, get Stanley for 20, 21 million a season, which, yes, is a big contract, of course, but the Ravens can do it. The salary cap also shot up a lot more than they thought this year. So teams have a lot more to work with than they thought prior. So you go out and get him. You don't really have any other big free agents. I mean, you have Pat Ricard, which is not going to be a large contract at all. And you can kind of afford all these other guys to slip away if they do. So I would say priority number one is Stanley, and that's it. So you get him locked up, go dive in the market, see what these other guys are wanting atop the list. And Will Fries, I don't think Trey Smith is an option.
Yeah.
But like Will Fries, I would be all for it. It's just these offensive linemen tend to go super early on in free agency. A lot of them are usually agreed to a deal verbally before the window for the signings to become official even actually happens, like 4 p.m. on a Wednesday. These guys are going to go very quick. So the Ravens will have a lot of time to try to go after one of these top guys if that is their route. I just don't realistically think it's going to happen. Eric DeCosta also mentioned yesterday at the Combine that he said something along the lines of, we don't expect to be big spenders or something like that in the agency just because we don't have to. And he said he anticipates all of the draft picks being selected this year, which we'll get into that, of course. But I just think the path is not that difficult for the Ravens. I think it's very realistic. And I think a guy like Zeitler, if you were to call him, I think he would be all aboard coming back. I mean, I don't see why he wouldn't. And dude, that'd be a much better offensive line than we had last year, and I'd be all for it.
Yeah, I agree. There's definitely a lot of guys you can bring in. And, I like what you guys said. If you sign Stanley and also bring in one of these guards, I mean, that is That's an elite offensive line. That's a top 5 offensive line. And I don't know when it was. It was a few years ago. I feel like the front office was talking about building a wall around Lamar Jackson or something like that. And it never really happened. The whole 2021 thing with Villanueva and like Stanley was injured. The O-line hasn't been really good since 2019. And I think you need to get back to that. So, in terms of the draft, obviously round 1 is a spot we're hoping to not need to pick a tackle. That'd be not fun, just knowing that Ronnie Stanley is somewhere else. But you have Kelvin Banks, I believe, from Texas, Will Campbell, Josh Simmons, Ohio State, Armand Membu. Hopefully I said that correctly. Gray Zabel is a guy, is it North Dakota State, I think? He was going to be like a day 3 pick. And then the Senior Bowl came around and he dominated. So he kind of showed that he is on par. Because when you dominate at a smaller school, it's hard to tell if you're really good or if you're just like going to be okay. He dominated at the Senior Bowl. So he's going to be probably a first round pick, maybe day 2. Tyler Booker is a guard. I think if the Ravens can keep Stanley and draft Tyler Booker, obviously that's just as good as signing a guard probably. Then you got Tate Ratledge and Dylan Fairchild. It's definitely interesting. Obviously, we hope the Ravens are not picking a tackle in the first round, but if they sign Stanley, like I said, and maybe they can get someone on the defensive side in free agency instead of another guard, drafted guard in the first round, I think that's a really good couple of moves right there.
Yeah, I mean, the worst situation would be come draft night round 1 and the Ravens are coming up and they're almost forced to pick a tackle because they didn't get one in free agency. Stanley left. That would be terrible. We've seen that before.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying it wouldn't work out. Of course, it would probably be good. We'd probably get like a really good offensive tackle. It just sucks when you have to limit your options because we all know the Ravens live and die by the best player available tactic. And in that case, if you lose Stanley and then you didn't sign an alternative or something and you're not obviously confident in the guys you have, you're forced. You have to go after a tackle, whether you trade up, you trade back, or you just take anyone at 27. And that would suck. I really don't think that's going to happen. I think that's like a worst case scenario, and the Ravens know that, of course, and they're not going to allow themselves to put them in that situation. So I'm all for, in another world too, like kind of like we said, bring back Stanley. You can still sign Kevin Zeitler. I mean, think about you do those, and then you draft Tyler Booker round 1, and you're filling in both guard spots and locking up your left tackle. I mean, if you want to talk about really going after offensive line and like not pushing in all your chips, but like really focusing on that, and that's not crazy to think about. The Ravens could 100% do that. And Tyler Booker late round 1, that would be a good pick, good value there, and he's obviously an incredible player. And I mean, you would have all five pieces across the offensive line, and you know what you're getting next season, and that very likely could result in a top 5 offensive line if and when they stay healthy, of course. So I really don't think we got to focus on tackles in the draft. I just don't see that happening. But in the worst case scenario, if we do, there's a lot of options available, and the Ravens like their offensive linemen. And I think they'll make the right moves necessary.
So I'm going to kind of tie back to McCary and his kind of upcoming free agency as well. I think his market's pretty high, right? He's a swing guy. He can be everywhere. Just like I mentioned with my guy Becton, that's another young guy. Becton's 25, McCary's 27. Those are guys that with a price range of around 10 mil is not ridiculous. If they can play a few different spots for you, I would say that's absolutely worth it. But hopefully Ronnie gets signed, right? We keep saying that, but in this world that I'm living in, that's hopefully what's happening. Ronnie signed, but if we get to day 1 draft and can pick a best available type thing again, I would think that the front office would target a guy that's capable of playing guard, even if he's not listed as it. So like you guys mentioned, Tyler Booker, Ratledge, and Fairchild all listed as guards here. But if one of those tackles is there and he's well past where he's been projected, I think the Ravens pounce on an opportunity like that and maybe move some guys around. I think that's kind of the draft thought process right now has been best available, and what a awesome advantage to be able to do that. I'm just thinking of the past with not necessarily this position group, but if this position group is what we want to keep targeting, hopefully the front office is like that, and we get to the draft and get to have the embarrassment of riches and take a best offensive lineman available and say, hey, we're capable of moving guys and coaching guys well enough to excel in different positions. If you can do it with someone like McCary, you can probably do it with a young guy that's maybe had some experience in the past. I'm sure that's on the radar for the front office.
Yeah, I like that. That's not really something I thought of, because so many tackles are drafted that play guard right away. I think Zabel is definitely one of those guys who can probably play anywhere. Who knows if he can play center or not, but he can definitely play the other four at least. So that'd be an interesting pick as well. Okay, Dawson.
Real quick. One thing I want to mention on the draft too is we know this, that obviously the Ravens live and die, like I said, by the best player available situation. And if they truly think at their pick that there is an offensive lineman available, or maybe even multiple, but there's also another pass rusher, obviously that's a huge need. We talked about it last week, Brad. That's probably going to be the pick at 27 if I were to guess, as long as the board falls the way it should.
Yeah.
I just think that if there's multiple guys available and the Ravens opt to go the pass rusher route, they obviously have tons of draft picks this year. There's no way they can't make a move up into another round, to shore up and maybe take two offensive linemen. We've seen that multiple times where the Ravens double dip at a position in the draft when even we're like, why are they doing that? We've seen tight end in the past. We've seen offensive linemen a million times. Of course, that's very common. It would not surprise me at all if the Ravens take like a pass rusher first round and then for the next 2 or 3 rounds they take offensive linemen. I mean, seriously, it's not crazy to think about. This offensive lineman class is very deep. I've seen a lot of things about the depth here. Yeah, even guys in the mid rounds are expected to be very quality players. So it would not surprise me at all if the Ravens end up not taking the guy round 1, but they make a move to bounce up and get even closer and then take one of those guys. Kind of like Zach mentioned, if they start to slip, and they're all about the value. So if there's a guy that slips into round 2 or 3, who knows, dude? We see it all the time in drafts. The Ravens could be on it.
Yeah, I like that. With 11 picks, like you mentioned,
Right.
you could get. I mean, they only have 5 guys on the roster right now, so they usually go into when the 53 roster is finalized. They usually have 10 offensive linemen, so they're probably going to add 4 or 5 offensive linemen this offseason. So it'll be interesting to see.
Be a completely new room because you're probably going to lose McCary. Penn Cleveland's probably gone after a unfortunate DUI event as he's becoming a free agent. So that probably wrote off that re-signing if that was even going to happen in the first place. So it's going to be a whole new room next year. I mean, seriously, and I don't think the Ravens have confidence in throwing like Nick Samick out there right now at any position, and he's more so the backup center behind Tyler, of course. So it'll be interesting to see how they attack it and what kind of guys they go after.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so Zach, if you were Eric DeCosta, sort of break down what you would do with the offensive line this offseason.
Look, dream scenario. If I'm ADC, we have talked about it. Rodney comes back, maybe a guard is signed, and then in the draft, you get to have a blast and take the best available.
Exactly.
No matter what. That sounds pretty fun, but that's not necessarily the decision making that is what DeCosta would be set back by. It's mostly the market in general. If off rip guys are flying in this market because of the depth in the draft as well. I think that Stanley is the number one. We've said that all episode. We're gonna say that still all offseason until hopefully it happens. I hope so.
Yeah.
But if you bring Ronnie back, that's perfect. Perfect start, right? You have 2 guard spots now that are kind of up in the air. And I think what the Ravens are getting pretty used to doing is letting one of those be a competition spot. So if one of those spots is addressed via Zeitler or in the draft, the other late round pick guy that is the double dip, like Dawson mentioned, gets put into the Falele into Voorhees competition where one of those guys got to win it, and hopefully it's a fun competition and makes them better and more confident going into the season. I think that's the plan, obviously, with how it's been lately. And I think since we have technically a Pro Bowl alternate and technically a guy that's very valuable in Voorhees and technically all these picks that we can still use on him, why not handle it like that? Why not see if, Voorhees is really balling out right now? Oh, Falele's dominating? Wow, go ahead and start him again. Or you draft some guy and he's a gem and then it all works out. I think that's the perfect plan to the offseason, as in addressing it well and addressing it with that slight optimism in hoping that other positions are addressed just as much, because I think we'd all want that as well.
Mm-hmm.
It's just, this is so important that we'd be happy if it was a spending spree, or we'd also be happy if they addressed it like I mentioned, and kind of like the Ravens way of doing it the last few years.
If I am Mr. Eric DaCosta, priority number one, bring back Stanley by all means necessary. Get the deal done. Get it done by the end of the week. I mean, seriously, get this guy locked up. So the free agent market, he's not even sniffing, and he knows where he's going to be next year. No question about it. I would bring back Stanley, give him whatever he wants. I would go after and get Kevin Zeitler, because I think if you offered him a fair market deal, he would want to come back. And I know this isn't a long-term guard option, of course, but it allows the Ravens to limit their spending right now, where they can focus on other areas, but they know what they're getting from a very, very, very quality veteran guard. And he can kind of help, the young Andrew Voorhees develop and Daniel Falele or whatever you want to talk about that. But I think having a core, and you're not going to spend too much money. I mean, obviously Stanley's a lot of money, but the Zeitler won't be. You could probably get him on a 2-year deal worth like $20 million or less. So that's very, very fair for the play he provides. I would go out and have basically Stanley, throw in Voorhees at left guard next season, and kind of have a little competition for one spot rather than two spots like we had all of last season. I would feel a lot more confident having 2 or 3, hell, maybe even 4 guys battle for one left guard position rather than having both guard positions up for grabs, because then that's just a nightmare and it's too much inconsistency. There's no chemistry that can be built. I would rather just have them fight for left guard. So basically Stanley, Voorhees, Linderbaum, Zeitler, and then Rosengarten. And I think that would be absolutely amazing. And I would basically go out in the draft, and then come round 1 in the early rounds, you can take best player available. You can take whoever you want, best player on your board, no matter what position, because that's how the Ravens do it, even if that is offensive line. And basically, your starting offensive line come week 1, and you can draft a couple mid-round guys who, in all likelihood, they're not really going to start, obviously, right away, but they're guys you can develop over time and hope become a starter one day, much like recent memory at the Ravens. There's a lot of mid-round offensive linemen who have become capable starters for them. I just think that's a perfect situation. I don't want to limit ourselves at all come draft time, because, Eric DaCosta likes to spread the board all across the room. And I just think that's a good approach for the Ravens, and I think it could be fairly easily done.
I would say my plan, but it was the exact same as you guys. I'm in full agreement. Dawson and I talked about edge last week, edge rushers. And, we talked about how important it is to be able to get pressure with 4 and all that. Well, when you're playing a team that gets pressure with 4, how do you stop it? You do what the Chiefs didn't do. Honestly, a side note, it's kind of crazy how the Chiefs can't figure out how to get a great offensive line when you have the best quarterback of all time. They've really struggled with that recently. So it's not easy, right? It's not easy. They were there. They had Stanley and Brown. Stanley had the ACL. It was just a tough situation, right? And it can take a while to recover from something like that, right? Orlando Brown wants to leave. Okay, you get rid of Orlando Brown, and then Stanley's injured, right? So then you're kind of left with nothing. And they've slowly worked their way back. 21 was terrible. But every year since then, it's been at least an average offensive line. So I do give them some credit. But I think we all agree, we would rather, I would rather have a top 5 offensive line than having great pass rush, in my opinion. I really think it's the most important thing besides Lamar Jackson. So
yeah, especially when you have an offense that relies on the run game as heavy as we do. and they can make anything happen out of nothing, like we've seen a million times. But still, our offensive line last year was good, not great. And if you go out this offseason and make it like step up to the great category, think
Yeah.
about even more what can happen from this offense, given what they just did. It can get even better.
Yeah.
And real quick, before we end this, I just want to address one thing. I think a lot of people are concerned over, of course, Ronnie Stanley's past with injuries, and I totally get it. It's been a brutal road since he signed a 5-year mega extension back in 2020. And I just want to say that it is concerning, of course, but he played every single game last season, and he was elite. Like, he was one of the best tackles in the NFL. And I understand, looking at probably a 3, maybe 4-year contract extension. I would say probably 3.
Yeah, 3.
I would say probably 3 is comfortable. Maybe if a bad team jumps in there over the Ravens, if he hits the market, that it can be 4. But I think probably a 3-year deal somewhere around 60 to 65 million is probably safe to say. I would feel a lot more comfortable going that route and just hoping Stanley can stay healthy and build off the season he just had. And now he can have an off season ahead of him where he's focusing strictly on his game rather than recovering from a brutal injury or getting his body right. I would rely on that a lot more than losing him and then having to plug in a left or right tackle from day one and hope that he gives you even decent production as a starter. So, like I said, I understand the injury concern, but if I'm the Ravens and as a fan, I think we could all agree that we'd much rather take that chance and rely that he becomes healthy rather than going a bad route.
And that's exactly why you sort of attack it, right? Like, maybe you are slightly concerned about Stanley's injury. Okay, draft another tackle in the 3rd round or the 4th round with your 11 picks, right? And you'd not be fine if Stanley got injured, but it'd be better than having no one out there. So,
right. I just don't want to see a world where Stanley leaves and the Ravens are scrambling to have either Roger over a left tackle, or they're drafting a rookie left tackle, or they're going out and signing a veteran. Or I don't want to see that world, man. I would just rather 100 times out of 100 just bring our guy back because he has the chemistry. He's a great player when he plays, and I think he wants to be here. And I just don't see any reason not to bring him back.
I agree. If Stanley does get out of here, I'd say right away you got to go get Alaric Jackson. He's probably the next best guy. That would be a priority if you can't retain Stanley for whatever reason. So just make sure you get a top tackle in free agency.
That's what I was saying in the beginning is like, if he does leave, you can't afford to miss out. Like if he leaves, you have to for sure go out and bandage up the position essentially, because if you lose him, that's one of your best players. That's one of the best players on the Ravens at a very, very important critical position. I mean, that's your blindside protector for your superstar quarterback.
Yeah.
You can't mess around and just hope that, whoever you fill in works. And obviously we love Roger, but you never know, dude. You can throw a guy across the line and he can become a completely different player. You never know. And I don't think he would be bad at left tackle. It's just a point of like, why even entertain that thought if you don't have to?
Exactly. You got anything else to add, Zach?
No, I was going to say something, but I honestly completely forgot. So maybe next time. I don't know.
All good. All good. Well, thank you guys for watching this video. We appreciate all the love and support. Make sure to like the video if you haven't already. Subscribe to the channel if this is your first time watching us. Obviously, both those things help us out a ton. Gets us on the algorithm. If you'd rather listen on Spotify, links in the description of every video. So you can do that. Maybe you're driving to work or something. Can't watch the show. Listen on Spotify. With that being said, we will see you guys next time. We have a couple more of these to go. I think we're going to do DB. What else is there? We're going to do another one.
Maybe wide receiver. Maybe.
Yeah, maybe wide receiver.
Yeah.
Who knows? Maybe tight end. We'll see about that. But yeah, anyway, guys, thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace.